The evening started like any other in the grand restaurant, with soft lights casting a warm glow over polished tables and the faint scent of fresh flowers filling the air. Staff moved quietly, ensuring that every chair was in its place and that every plate and glass was spotless. The murmurs of diners blended into the soft background music, and the atmosphere was calm and composed, a place where people expected comfort and excellent service. But tonight, a sense of anticipation and tension hung in the air. Everyone in the staff room had heard the rumors. A very important Japanese billionaire was expected. Known for his sharp temper and exacting standards, he was someone who demanded perfection in every interaction. No one spoke Japanese fluently, and the thought of the language barrier caused the staff to exchange uneasy glances. Their training could prepare them for polite conversation, but they all knew that handling a guest like him required more than just standard procedures. It required instinct, patience, and maybe a bit of luck. As the clock ticked closer to the scheduled arrival, the maitre d' stood near the entrance, straightening his suit and checking his watch. The other staff followed suit, making last-minute adjustments to their stations. The kitchen staff had been briefed about the special requests and were prepared for unusual orders. Everyone knew that this dinner could either be a routine service or an unforgettable challenge, depending entirely on how the guest would behave. Then the moment arrived. A sleek black car pulled up outside, and the driver opened the door with precision. The billionaire emerged, his presence immediately commanding attention. He wore a tailored suit, his posture perfect, and his expression unreadable. His eyes swept across the restaurant with a keen intensity, as though measuring everything from the decor to the staff with a single glance. The entourage that accompanied him moved silently, each member aware that their leader was not someone to be trifled with. Inside, the staff watched as the group approached the reserved table. The air seemed to tighten with every step the billionaire took. The maitre d' stepped forward, bowing slightly, and tried to greet him in English. The billionaire responded, but his tone was curt and clipped. It quickly became clear that he preferred to speak in Japanese, a language that none of the staff could fully understand. The room held a quiet tension as he began to speak rapidly, gesturing subtly to indicate his preferences. The staff nodded politely, but inside, a wave of worry passed through them. They could feel the pressure mounting. Every movement had to be precise, every word carefully chosen, and yet the language barrier made even the simplest interactions a potential minefield. At the center of this unfolding tension was the waitress assigned to the table. She had been with the restaurant for a few years and had encountered demanding guests before, but nothing like this. She observed the billionaire closely, noting his habits, the way he held his hands, the subtle inflections in his voice, and even the way he surveyed the room. She realized that much of what he was communicating went beyond words. His gestures, his expressions, and the rhythm of his speech all offered clues. If she could decode them, she might be able to bridge the gap where language could not. The initial exchange was uncomfortable. The billionaire made a request that required immediate attention, and the waitress repeated it to her colleague, hoping to clarify. But the instructions got lost in translation. Plates were moved slightly, drinks were poured a bit too slowly, and the billionaire's brow furrowed. A low sigh escaped him, and his irritation was palpable. The staff froze, unsure how to recover from the misstep. They had been trained to handle demanding customers, but the combination of high status, cultural differences, and language barriers created a unique challenge. It was a situation where one wrong move could escalate tension instantly. The waitress didn't panic. Instead, she took a deep breath and reminded herself of a principle she had learned long ago. Observation is as important as words. She started to watch the billionaire more intently, paying attention to patterns in his behavior. The way he gestured towards the menu, the subtle nods and shakes of his head, the tone of his voice when something displeased him, each detail was a piece of the puzzle. Slowly, she began to anticipate his needs before they were even spoken. When he reached for a napkin, she was already placing one in front of him. When he raised an eyebrow at a side dish, she subtly adjusted it before he had to ask. The small acts of attentiveness began to ease the tension ever so slightly. Despite her efforts, the billionaire's frustration was still evident. A minor mistake, a plate slightly out of alignment, caused him to lean forward, his hands tightening on the edge of the table. The staff froze, unsure whether to apologize or simply adjust silently. It was a delicate situation, and every second seemed to stretch longer than the last. The room was silent except for the faint clinking of utensils, each sound magnified by the charged atmosphere. At that moment, the waitress realized that her actions alone might not be enough. Words, though limited by language, were still necessary. She remembered a phrase her friend had taught her years ago, something simple but polite in Japanese. It wasn't perfect, but it might be enough to show respect and attentiveness. She formulated the words carefully in her mind, practicing the tone and rhythm silently before speaking. Confidence was key. Hesitation could make the gesture meaningless. As she approached the table, the billionaire glanced up, his expression sharp and expectant. She bowed slightly and delivered the phrase with measured respect. The words were met with a brief pause. The billionaire's eyes widened slightly, a subtle flicker of surprise crossing his face. He repeated the words slowly, as if testing whether he had heard correctly. The room held its breath. Even the other diners were drawn into the moment, sensing that something important was unfolding quietly at the center of the restaurant. The initial shock faded, replaced by a curiosity in the billionaire's expression. He gestured again, and this time the waitress was able to respond, matching the tone and rhythm of his speech as best as she could. Communication, though imperfect, had begun. The rigid tension that had gripped the room loosened slightly, replaced by cautious optimism. The staff exchanged subtle glances, relief beginning to replace anxiety, though they remained vigilant. They understood that this was just the beginning, that the evening could still turn in unexpected ways. The billionaire, now somewhat reassured that he could be understood, began to relax incrementally. He continued to speak, occasionally mixing Japanese with gestures and expressions. The waitress responded in kind, interpreting and acting on his requests with precision and care. Each successful interaction built confidence, not only for her but for the entire team. The maitre d', the other servers, even the kitchen staff felt the change in the air. It was a small victory, but in the world of high-pressure service it was significant. The rest of the evening still held uncertainty. The billionaire's standards were high, and the possibility of mistakes lingered like a shadow. Yet, in that moment, the waitress had found a way to connect. She had turned observation into action, and action into understanding, bridging a gap that could have caused frustration and failure. It was a quiet triumph, almost invisible to the untrained eye, but powerful in its effect. The stage was set, and the first part of the evening had established a delicate balance between tension and potential harmony. What happened next would depend on her skill, her composure, and her ability to keep navigating the unpredictable waters of a very demanding guest. The restaurant had regained a sense of fragile calm, but the air was still charged with a quiet tension. Every staff member knew that the billionaire's temper could flare at the smallest mistake, and even the slightest misstep could undo the progress made earlier. The waitress remained focused, carefully reading his gestures and expressions, fully aware that she had to maintain her composure no matter what happened next. The billionaire began to speak again, this time pointing to a series of items on the menu. He was clear in his gestures, but the language barrier still made it difficult for the staff to understand the specifics. He had a preference for certain dishes prepared in a particular way, something not normally requested by standard diners. The kitchen staff looked to the waitress, expecting her to interpret. She nodded confidently and relayed the instructions in a way she hoped would match the intent. Even though her Japanese was limited, every word mattered, and she felt the pressure of knowing that failure was not an option. The first dish arrived, plated carefully but slightly differently from what the billionaire expected. He leaned forward, his expression darkening, and the other diners could sense his frustration. A faint murmur ran through the room, and the staff instinctively froze. The waitress, however, stepped forward calmly, gently adjusting the plate while maintaining a polite tone. She explained, in her limited Japanese, that the dish had been prepared according to the kitchen standard method, but could be adjusted immediately if he preferred. The billionaire studied her for a long moment, then nodded, seemingly satisfied that his wishes were being acknowledged. It was a small victory, but one that set the tone for the rest of the evening. As the meal continued, the billionaire occasionally paused to observe the surroundings, assessing the staff and the service with careful scrutiny. The waitress noticed that he had a particular way of evaluating people. Subtle gestures, small movements of the eyes, and minute changes in posture that revealed his thoughts. She mirrored these observations, adjusting her approach with each interaction. When he raised his hand slightly, she anticipated his request. When he furrowed his brow, she responded with patience and attentiveness. It was like a silent dance, a way of connecting without relying solely on words. Despite the gradual improvement, tension still lingered. A minor mistake in the serving order caused the billionaire to frown sharply, and the staff instinctively tensed. The waitress, however, remained composed. She approached the situation with care, apologizing politely and explaining the mix-up in simple Japanese. Her tone was respectful but confident, and her eyes conveyed sincerity. The billionaire's frown softened slightly as he realized that she understood and was taking immediate action to correct the error. It was clear that she had earned a measure of his respect, even if only quietly in that moment. The other diners began to notice the interaction, whispering among themselves about the remarkable way the waitress handled the difficult guest. It was not just her knowledge of the language but also her poise, her calm under pressure, and the way she treated every request seriously. People admired her without fully understanding the skill it required. It was a reminder that true professionalism often goes unseen, but it has a profound impact on the experience of others. The billionaire's entourage watched silently, impressed by her ability to navigate the complexities of the situation. They had seen many staff members stumble in the past, but this waitress handled each challenge with quiet confidence. She anticipated needs, corrected minor mistakes before they escalated, and maintained a steady composure. Her presence had become the stabilizing force in the room, subtly guiding the atmosphere toward order and respect. At one point, the billionaire requested a specific type of drink, something rare and not commonly available. The staff looked uncertain, unsure how to fulfill the request. The waitress took the initiative, quietly checking with the bar staff and returning with a suitable substitute that matched the quality he expected. She placed the drink before him with a polite bow, explaining the substitution in her limited Japanese. The billionaire examined the drink carefully, took a sip, and nodded approvingly. It was another small triumph, a moment that reinforced her competence and presence. Throughout the evening, the waitress continued to demonstrate a remarkable balance of humility and authority. She never overstepped, but she took ownership of each interaction, showing that she was not intimidated by the billionaire's reputation. She adapted quickly to his preferences, learned from subtle cues, and maintained a level of professionalism that elevated the service beyond routine expectations. Even when faced with unexpected demands, she responded calmly, thinking several steps ahead to anticipate his needs before they became problems. The staff began to relax slightly, drawing strength from her example. They watched how she handled difficult situations, learning from her ability to transform a tense atmosphere into one that felt controlled and respectful. It was a lesson in patience, observation, and quiet leadership, all executed without a single moment of arrogance or condescension. Her actions spoke louder than words, showing that skill and dedication could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Midway through the meal, the billionaire paused to ask a question about one of the dishes. His tone was sharp, almost challenging, and the staff froze, unsure how to respond. The waitress, however, leaned in slightly and answered with confidence, using the words she had learned and matching the respectful tone he expected. Her answer was met with a subtle nod, and for the first time, the billionaire's demeanor showed a hint of approval. It was a turning point, a moment that demonstrated her growing influence over the situation and her ability to communicate effectively despite the language barrier. As the evening progressed, the billionaire's mood gradually improved. He began to make fewer sharp gestures, his tone softened, and he even offered brief compliments when a request was met exactly as he wanted. The staff sensed the change and felt a collective relief. It was clear that the waitress had earned his trust, and that her skill had transformed a potentially volatile situation into a manageable and even pleasant experience. Her ability to combine language, observation, and action had created a bridge between cultures and personalities, allowing the evening to unfold smoothly. The restaurant's energy shifted from tension to a quiet admiration for the waitress's competence. Even the kitchen staff felt a sense of pride, knowing that their hard work and her guidance had created a seamless service. The diners who were not directly involved in the interaction also noticed the professionalism and dedication that permeated the room. It was a subtle but powerful lesson in how one person's focus and skill could influence an entire environment. By the end of the main course, the billionaire seemed genuinely satisfied. He leaned back in his chair, occasionally gesturing or asking questions, but the sharpness that had defined his arrival was gone. The waitress continued to attend to him with care, making small adjustments, clearing plates, and offering refills without hesitation. Each action was deliberate, thoughtful, and executed with respect. It was the kind of service that felt effortless to the diner, though the effort and skill required were extraordinary. The evening's progress was not without challenges, but the waitress's ability to maintain composure, communicate effectively, and anticipate needs had transformed what could have been a tense and difficult dinner into a demonstration of professionalism and empathy. Her presence had become the key factor in the success of the evening, proving that skill, observation, and calmness could overcome even the most intimidating obstacles. The stage was set for the final moments of the meal, where her competence would be further tested and recognized, and where the impact of her actions would leave a lasting impression on everyone present. The dinner had reached a critical point, and the atmosphere was a mix of cautious calm and silent anticipation. The billionaire, whose presence had dominated the room from the start, had begun to settle into the meal, but his sharp eyes still surveyed the surroundings with the same intensity. Every gesture, every movement from the staff was under careful observation, and the slightest misstep could trigger a reaction. The waitress, however, had grown increasingly confident, her previous successes giving her a quiet strength that radiated to those around her. The billionaire leaned slightly forward, studying the table settings with a scrutinizing gaze. He pointed to a dish and asked a question that no one understood at first. The staff hesitated, unsure how to interpret his words or respond. The waitress, standing close by, listened intently to the tone and rhythm of his speech. She could tell from his gestures and facial expressions that he wanted something adjusted in a particular way. Without hesitation, she stepped forward and addressed him in Japanese, speaking clearly but politely, explaining what could be done and offering alternatives. The billionaire's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but then he nodded. The room seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. It was a small but significant moment, one that reinforced her role as the key intermediary in the evening. As the courses continued, the billionaire made several requests that tested both the language skills and the attentiveness of the staff. Each time, the waitress anticipated his needs, moving swiftly to ensure everything was prepared and presented exactly as he wanted. She noticed the subtle signs he gave when a dish met his standards. A small lift of the eyebrows, a slight smile, a brief nod. Conversely, when he showed disapproval through a slight shake of the head or a tightened expression, she immediately corrected the situation. Her ability to read these cues and respond with precision gradually eased the tension, and even the kitchen staff began to relax slightly, trusting her judgment. The other diners began to take note of the dynamic at the table. They whispered quietly among themselves, admiring how the waitress managed the situation with such grace and poise. It wasn't just her knowledge of Japanese that impressed them. It was her confidence, her ability to anticipate needs, and the calm authority she displayed in the face of a potentially intimidating guest. People were drawn to her composure, the quiet way she handled pressure without raising her voice or showing frustration. At one point, the billionaire requested a dish that required special preparation. The kitchen staff looked uncertain, unsure if they could meet the precise specifications. The waitress, noticing their hesitation, stepped in and calmly relayed the instructions in a way they could understand, bridging the gap between his expectations and the kitchen's abilities. She supervised the preparation with attention to every detail, ensuring the final result would meet the billionaire's standards. When the dish was finally served, she presented it with a respectful bow and explained the preparation briefly in Japanese. The billionaire examined it carefully, took a small taste, and then nodded in approval. A subtle smile crossed his face, and for the first time that evening, a genuine sense of satisfaction was visible. It was a turning point, showing that even the most demanding requests could be handled with the right approach. Throughout the meal, the waitress remained vigilant, aware that the billionaire's mood could shift at any moment. She watched his interactions, noting the small cues that indicated satisfaction or frustration. Her attentiveness extended to the finer details, refilling his water glass at just the right time, adjusting the placement of utensils, and clearing plates smoothly without interrupting the flow of conversation. Each small action contributed to the overall impression, reinforcing her professionalism and ability to manage a challenging situation. The billionaire, who had arrived with an air of stern authority, began to show signs of genuine engagement. He asked questions about the menu, inquired about the origin of ingredients, and even commented on the presentation of the dishes. The waitress responded with clear explanations, using the Japanese she knew and carefully matching her tone to his. Her confidence and knowledge impressed him, and he began to treat her not just as a server, but as a capable guide through the dining experience. This subtle shift changed the entire dynamic, allowing the interaction to move from tense formality to mutual respect. At one point, the billionaire gestured toward the restaurant's wine collection. He requested a particular vintage that was rare and expensive. The staff exchanged worried glances, unsure if it was available. The waitress quickly checked the cellar, confirmed that it could be provided, and returned with the bottle. She presented it with a respectful bow, explaining the details of the wine in simple Japanese. The billionaire inspected the bottle, uncorked it himself, and poured a taste. Satisfied, he gestured for her to pour the glasses. Each movement was careful, deliberate, and executed with precision, reflecting the trust that had been built through the earlier interactions. As dessert approached, the billionaire seemed more relaxed than he had been at the start of the evening. He spoke less sharply, smiled more often, and even made a few polite jokes. The staff noticed the change, recognizing that the waitress had played a major role in transforming the atmosphere. Her ability to anticipate needs, communicate effectively, and maintain calm under pressure had shifted the mood from tension to a sense of admiration and respect. The other diners, who had been quietly observing the table, began to see the situation not as a conflict but as a demonstration of skill and professionalism. The waitress's composure and attentiveness created a ripple effect, influencing everyone around her. Even the kitchen staff, initially tense and anxious, now worked with a sense of pride, knowing that their efforts were contributing to a positive outcome. The energy in the restaurant shifted subtly, from quiet apprehension to a shared appreciation for her competence and dedication. Throughout the evening, the waitress continued to manage the balance between anticipation and responsiveness. She moved with purpose, speaking when necessary, acting when required, and observing continuously. Her actions were not just about service. They were about creating a connection, bridging the gap between cultures, and navigating the complexities of human interaction. She understood that her role extended beyond the physical tasks of serving, and that her ability to communicate, interpret, and respond effectively was what truly mattered. By the time the main courses were cleared, the billionaire's satisfaction was evident. He leaned back slightly, relaxed, and seemed genuinely pleased with the experience. He continued to make requests, but they were met with smooth, confident responses from the waitress. Her skill in managing the interaction had transformed what could have been a tense and stressful evening into a well-coordinated and respectful dining experience. Her ability to combine observation, language, and action had created a bridge of understanding, allowing the dinner to proceed smoothly despite the initial challenges. The evening had reached a point where the waitress's role was no longer just about service. It was about leadership, empathy, and connection. She had turned a potentially volatile situation into an opportunity for understanding and mutual respect. Each action she took, each word she spoke, and each adjustment she made contributed to a seamless experience that left a lasting impression on the billionaire, the staff, and even the other diners. It was a quiet triumph, one that demonstrated the power of composure, skill, and human-centered attention in the face of demanding circumstances. As the dessert plates were placed on the table, the billionaire's expression had softened completely. There was no trace of the initial fuming anger that had dominated his arrival. Instead, there was a sense of calm, satisfaction, and quiet approval. The waitress continued to attend to him, offering explanations, serving delicacies, and responding to requests with precision and care. Her ability to handle every detail had elevated the evening from a potentially tense encounter to a memorable experience that reflected both her professionalism and her humanity. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted dramatically from the start of the evening. The staff, initially tense and uncertain, now moved with confidence, inspired by her example. The diners, who had been curious observers, now felt a sense of admiration for the skill and dedication she displayed. And the billionaire, who had entered with high expectations and a sharp temper, had been transformed by her careful attention and respectful communication. It was a testament to the power of calm, thoughtful action, and the profound impact one person could have on an entire environment. The stage was set for the final moments of the meal, where the waitress's competence would be further recognized, and the significance of her actions would be fully realized. The story of her ability to navigate the challenges of language, culture, and high-pressure service was only halfway complete, but it was already clear that her presence had left an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed her skill, patience, and grace under pressure. The evening had grown darker outside, with the soft glow of streetlights beginning to blend with the warm interior of the restaurant. The dinner, which had started with tension and unease, had shifted significantly thanks to the careful guidance of the waitress. The billionaire, once a figure of stern authority and visible irritation, now seemed more composed, though his expectations remained high. Every detail still mattered, and the staff knew that the final stages of the meal would be crucial in leaving a lasting impression. The dessert course arrived, each plate beautifully arranged with care and precision. The waitress approached the table, her eyes scanning for subtle cues in the billionaire's expression. She had learned to read the slight movements of his head, the change in tone when he spoke, and the subtle shifts in his posture. These tiny indicators guided her every action, ensuring that each service was executed perfectly. As she placed the first dessert in front of him, she spoke briefly in Japanese, explaining the ingredients and preparation. The billionaire listened attentively, nodding in acknowledgement. The staff around her watched silently, impressed by the skill and calm authority she maintained. The billionaire's attention to detail remained sharp. He asked about the origin of certain ingredients and the method of preparation for others. The waitress responded patiently, explaining as clearly as possible and ensuring that her words were matched by her actions. Her ability to combine language and observation had created a bridge between him and the restaurant, allowing communication to flow more smoothly despite the initial barriers. The room seemed to sense the change in dynamic, the tension easing into a quiet admiration for her composure and professionalism. Midway through dessert, the billionaire leaned back slightly, observing the staff with a keen eye. He gestured toward a particular feature in the room, asking a question in Japanese that would have been impossible to answer without understanding the language. The waitress stepped forward, translating and responding with confidence. Her explanation was concise but respectful, and she waited patiently for his approval. He nodded, a subtle but meaningful gesture that indicated satisfaction. It was a small moment, yet it carried the weight of the entire evening. She had earned his trust, and that trust allowed the interaction to progress smoothly. Throughout the course of the dessert, small challenges continued to arise. A slight misplacement of a plate, a timing issue with a drink refill, or a minor kitchen delay could have caused frustration, but the waitress handled each issue with quiet efficiency. She communicated calmly with the kitchen, adjusted presentation as needed, and addressed the billionaire's requests promptly. Her actions were deliberate and measured, reflecting both competence and an understanding of the nuances of high-pressure service. Every correction she made was subtle, ensuring that the guest experienced nothing but smooth, professional service. The billionaire, who had initially been tense and critical, now began to show signs of appreciation. He complimented the dessert presentation and asked more questions about the ingredients, demonstrating genuine interest rather than mere scrutiny. The waitress responded with polite explanations, ensuring that each interaction reinforced the sense of respect and understanding she had established earlier. The shift in his demeanor was noticeable to everyone in the restaurant, including the staff and other diners, who quietly acknowledged the remarkable way she had navigated the situation. As the dessert course progressed, the billionaire requested a particular item from the wine selection, one that was rare and not commonly served. The staff hesitated, unsure if they could meet the request, but the waitress took control. She confirmed availability, explained the wine to the billionaire, and arranged for it to be served with precision. Her calm confidence reassured both the staff and the guest, ensuring that the request was fulfilled without a hitch. The billionaire tasted the wine, nodded approvingly, and gestured for her to pour for the rest of the table. It was another example of her ability to anticipate needs and act decisively, turning potential stress into a moment of seamless service. The atmosphere in the restaurant had changed dramatically from the beginning of the evening. What had started as tension and apprehension had evolved into mutual respect and admiration. The other diners noticed the interactions at the billionaire's table, whispering quietly about the skill and poise of the waitress. They marveled at how she maintained composure, communicated effectively despite language barriers, and ensured that the guests' high expectations were met. Her ability to balance observation, action, and respectful communication had transformed the dining experience into something extraordinary. The billionaire, now more relaxed, asked questions about the restaurant's history and the background of some of the staff. The waitress responded with informative but concise explanations, ensuring that each response was accurate and respectful. She moved seamlessly between tasks, attending to his requests, observing his reactions, and making subtle adjustments to maintain the flow of service. Her skillful navigation of these interactions reinforced her role as the central figure in managing the guest's experience, creating a calm and confident environment around the table. At one point, a small issue arose with a table setting that had not been perfectly aligned. The billionaire noticed immediately and gestured in mild displeasure. The waitress approached calmly, explained the situation politely in Japanese, and corrected the setting with care. The billionaire's expression softened, showing that he recognized her attentiveness and willingness to address the issue promptly. The other staff members observed silently, learning from her example and understanding how to manage the subtle expectations of a high-profile guest without causing conflict. The service continued smoothly, with each course and interaction reinforcing the billionaire's growing satisfaction. He asked fewer sharp questions and gave more subtle nods of approval. The waitress had transformed the initial tension into an experience marked by careful attention, respectful communication, and thoughtful responsiveness. Every action she took contributed to the overall impression, demonstrating the importance of poise, preparation, and empathy in high-pressure situations. The dessert service was completed with flawless timing, and the billionaire leaned back in his chair, visibly relaxed and content. He looked around the room, taking in the ambience and the efficiency of the staff, and then his gaze returned to the waitress. There was a subtle acknowledgement in his eyes, a recognition of the skill, patience, and composure she had demonstrated throughout the evening. It was a quiet but powerful moment, one that reflected the impact she had made on the entire dining experience. The staff, inspired by her example, moved with renewed confidence and coordination. They had witnessed firsthand how composure, skill, and attentive observation could transform a potentially difficult interaction into a smooth and respectful experience. Even the kitchen staff, who had initially been anxious, now worked with a sense of pride and calm, knowing that their efforts were contributing to a successful evening. As the final course ended and the plates were cleared, the billionaire seemed satisfied in a way that was evident even to the casual observer. His demeanor had shifted from stern authority to respectful engagement, reflecting the careful guidance of the waitress. She continued to attend to the final details with precision and grace, ensuring that every aspect of the service was completed to the highest standard. Her presence had not only managed the billionaire's expectations but had also elevated the experience for everyone involved, leaving a lasting impression of professionalism and competence. By the end of the meal, it was clear that the waitress's role had been pivotal. Her ability to read subtle cues, communicate effectively, and respond promptly had turned a potentially tense evening into a seamless and memorable experience. The billionaire's satisfaction was apparent, and the staff had learned valuable lessons in composure, observation, and the power of human-centered service. The evening had demonstrated that skill, patience, and thoughtful action could overcome even the most challenging circumstances, leaving a lasting mark on all who witnessed it. The story of the dinner was far from over, but the success of this phase had set the stage for the final moments, where the billionaire's appreciation would be fully revealed, and the impact of the waitress's extraordinary skill would be celebrated. Her actions had transformed the atmosphere, and the stage was set for the conclusion of a remarkable and unforgettable evening. The final part of the evening had arrived, and the atmosphere in the restaurant was charged with a quiet anticipation. The billionaire, who had entered earlier with sharp authority and visible irritation, now leaned back in his chair, his demeanor markedly different. His initial frustration had transformed into calm engagement, largely thanks to the waitress, whose attentiveness, skill, and poise had guided the entire dinner. Every staff member present sensed that the culmination of the evening would reveal the true impact of her actions. The waitress continued to move gracefully between the table and the kitchen, attending to the billionaire's final requests with precision. She noticed that he observed her closely, seemingly measuring not only her skill but also her composure under pressure. Even though she had navigated the evening's challenges successfully, she remained aware that the last impressions were just as important as the first. Small gestures, polite words, and careful timing were essential to ensuring that the entire experience concluded smoothly. He asked about a particular dessert technique, and she explained the process in simple Japanese, making sure that each step was clear. Her voice was calm and steady, her eyes attentive to his reactions. The billionaire leaned in slightly, clearly impressed by the explanation. He tasted the dessert and nodded, a subtle smile breaking the stern expression that had dominated much of the evening. It was a quiet acknowledgement, but it carried immense weight. The waitress had earned genuine respect, something that went beyond simple service or hospitality. The other diners observed silently, captivated by the dynamic between the billionaire and the waitress. They saw her attentiveness, her quiet authority, and her ability to interpret gestures and words with precision. Her actions created a ripple effect, influencing not only the immediate table but also the atmosphere of the entire restaurant. Staff members moved more confidently, inspired by her example, and even the kitchen operated with a renewed sense of focus and pride. Every part of the service now seemed seamless, a reflection of the guidance and skill she provided. The billionaire requested a final drink, one that required careful preparation and exact measurements. The waitress approached with calm confidence, checking with the bar staff and overseeing the preparation personally. She returned with the drink, presenting it with a polite bow and a brief explanation in Japanese. The billionaire examined the drink, tasted it carefully, and then gestured for her to pour for the rest of the table. Each movement was deliberate and precise, reflecting the trust he had placed in her. The staff around them felt a sense of relief, recognizing that the final stage of the evening had been handled flawlessly. As the meal came to a close, the billionaire leaned back and surveyed the restaurant, a subtle shift in his expression showing satisfaction and respect. He looked directly at the waitress and gave a nod that was more meaningful than any words could convey. It was an acknowledgement of her professionalism, composure, and ability to manage an otherwise challenging situation with grace. The staff recognized the significance of this gesture, understanding that she had not only met expectations but had exceeded them in a way that left a lasting impression. The waitress continued to attend to the final details, clearing plates and ensuring that everything was presented neatly. She maintained a calm, respectful tone as she interacted with the billionaire, offering explanations where necessary and responding to his questions with patience. Her ability to combine observation, language, and action had created a seamless dining experience, transforming what could have been a tense and stressful evening into one marked by respect and admiration. The billionaire, now fully engaged, asked about the origins of certain ingredients and about the staff's training. The waitress provided clear, concise explanations, highlighting both the quality of the restaurant's offerings and the professionalism of the team. Her responses were not just about information. They reflected understanding, empathy, and the ability to communicate effectively under pressure. Each answer reinforced the positive impression she had built throughout the evening, demonstrating her capability and poise. Other diners, who had been quietly observing, were impressed by the interaction. They whispered among themselves, noting the remarkable skill the waitress displayed. It was not merely her ability to speak some Japanese that captured attention, but her overall composure, her anticipation of the billionaire's needs, and the calm authority with which she managed the situation. Even those unfamiliar with high-profile service could recognize her talent, professionalism, and ability to handle pressure with grace. The billionaire requested the final check, and the waitress handled it with the same careful attention to detail as every other part of the evening. She presented it politely, explaining any items if necessary, and ensured that everything was correct. He reviewed it, nodded in approval, and then left a generous tip along with a brief handwritten note expressing his appreciation for her skill and professionalism. It was a final acknowledgement, a tangible reflection of the respect he had developed for her over the course of the evening. As the billionaire and his entourage departed, the restaurant staff quietly celebrated their own sense of accomplishment. The waitress, however, remained focused, completing the remaining tasks with care and ensuring that the restaurant was ready for the next service. Her dedication and skill had not only satisfied a demanding guest, but had also inspired her colleagues and elevated the overall standard of service. The experience had demonstrated that composure, attention to detail, and empathy could transform even the most challenging situations into successes. Later, the restaurant manager took a moment to commend the waitress. He praised her ability to handle the situation with professionalism and tact, noting that her calm presence had been the key factor in turning a potentially stressful evening into a memorable and successful one. The kitchen staff echoed these sentiments, expressing admiration for her skill and for the confidence she instilled in everyone around her. It was a moment of recognition, validating the quiet but powerful influence she had on the night's events. Reflecting on the evening, the waitress felt a quiet sense of pride. She had faced a challenging situation, one that could have easily resulted in tension and dissatisfaction, and had navigated it successfully. Her ability to anticipate needs, read subtle cues, and communicate effectively had transformed the dining experience for the billionaire and his entourage. More importantly, it had created a model for professionalism, empathy, and composure that inspired everyone around her. The experience reinforced her belief that skill, patience, and thoughtful action could overcome even the most intimidating circumstances. The story of the dinner spread quietly among the staff, becoming an example of what could be achieved with focus, preparation, and human-centered attention. The waitress's composure and skill had turned what might have been a stressful evening into a demonstration of excellence, leaving a lasting impression not only on the billionaire but also on her colleagues and the other diners who witnessed her work. It was a testament to the power of calm, attentive service, and the impact one person could have on an entire environment. As the restaurant lights dimmed and the last guests departed, the waitress reflected on the lessons of the evening. She had learned that observing carefully, responding thoughtfully, and maintaining composure were more valuable than any single skill. She understood that her actions had the power to transform experiences, influence perceptions, and create respect. Her performance that night had gone beyond mere service. It had been an exercise in human connection, empathy, and professionalism. In the end, the billionaire's approval, the satisfaction of the staff, and the admiration of the other diners all reflected the remarkable impact of her work. She had demonstrated that even in high-pressure situations, patience, skill, and a calm demeanor could turn potential conflict into success. The evening concluded not just as a dinner service but as a story of resilience, competence, and quiet leadership that would be remembered by all who witnessed it. The waitress had proven that preparation, observation, and thoughtful action could make a lasting impression, transforming a challenging situation into an extraordinary experience for everyone involved.